What should we expect from TCU this year? Kansas State, TCU play in the middle of the season, but will they play more than once? Will they find themselves battling for Arlington just like they did in 2022? It's a Locked On College crossover with Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On College crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into this Locked On College crossover, Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Horned Frogs. Christian Rauh, Stephen Simcox here, bringing you Big 12 action, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And if you have been a listener to Locked On Kansas State, if you're one of my everydayers, you might have heard this before, but I have no idea what to expect of TCU this year. I have tried to predict it. I've tried to figure it out, looking at the schedule, looking at some of the rosters, and I've had a really hard time. So, Stephen, I'm really hoping that you can help me out with this one. And I think we should start right there. What to make of TCU in 2025? We've had this sort of a rivalry between the two of us. We both found each other in Arlington in 2022. We got the better of that game, but you had the better season, finding yourself in the national championship in Sonny Dykes' first year. Now you get to 2025, you got a returning quarterback, and expectations seem high, but we talk about expectations high in some of the other teams inside the conference as well. What do you think about your program this season?
Well, thanks for having me on the show. I say this in the most respectful way possible. I really don't like Kansas State, but it's not because of the fans or anything other than they're consistently good. In the last couple times we've played football games against Kansas State, it hasn't gone our way. So yeah, but I'm excited to be on the show. I'm looking forward to matching up in Manhattan again this year. TCU kind of an enigma, a lot like a lot of other schools in the league. I would say I have high expectations for this team. I think they close the season really strong. And, after that Houston loss, which was sort of the low point of the year, they're 3-3. They had a bye week. Honestly, at that time, Christian, I thought that team might finish 5-7. I felt like they'd be looking for a new coaching staff potentially, but they ended up winning 6 of the last 7 games. They won their bowl game. It was against Louisiana in the New Mexico Bowl, but it's still a win in the postseason. And, their only loss was to a Baylor team that also finished the season really well on the road on a last-second field goal. So I think the defense in year 2 under Andy Avalos, relatively new defensive coordinator, they're looking to take a step forward. Josh Hoover in this offense should be improved. They're hoping that this run game looks better this upcoming season. So I think like a lot of other teams in the league, they feel like, hey, this is our year to make a push. They're really betting on continuity. They didn't go really heavy in the transfer portal. They didn't really add much to this coaching staff. They are banking on improving off that 8-4 regular season with the bowl win. And I think, honestly, even with the tough schedule they have, if they don't end up in Arlington, I feel like it's a disappointment. Now, that doesn't mean like it's a catastrophic failure, but I believe this team is good enough to take that step. When we think about Kansas State, I feel like, there's been so much consistency there under Chris Kleiman, really good on both sides of the line, typically a very good run game. I guess a twofold question. First off, I know they sort of let Will Howard walk and they handed the keys over to Avery Johnson. So did last year feel like a disappointment, or was it just like kind of a transitional season? At the end of it, you look back and you say, okay, we've got some pieces, and going into this year, where do you think they land when we're talking about, expectations for their season?
Yeah, I love that question. And I think that's a really good way of putting it together. Was it a disappointing year? I think it depends on where you look at it. Like if you're saying, was it a disappointing year because you didn't make it to Arlington? I think you could say maybe, because the talent was there. At least you thought the talent was there. You brought in the right pieces. At least you thought so in the portal. Some of those didn't work out, and especially the wide receiver department. But you started strong. You started 7-1, and then you wound up in the same spot as TCU did, which is interesting to say, because I don't think we, as people of the Big 12, as people of hosts of these shows, see both our schools in the same light right now. And the majority, you and I might differently, but if you're looking at the entire as a whole, you see TCU not being seen as highly as Kansas State in some of these preseason rankings, but they both finished 9-4 with a bowl win. It was different for Kansas State, though. They started 7-1, then the wheels fell off. So if I overall had to say, was it a disappointing year or was it a transitional year? Is it a cop-out to throw a little radio thing when he asks if you want a cherry or apple pie, and I say both? Like, which one is it? I think there's a little bit of both there. I think you can be excited because you can see progression from Avery Johnson. There was some issues with him last year, some throwing inconsistencies, potentially maybe even being injured towards the second half of the year, and you just didn't see his full potential. Now you go to year 2, and it's no longer just the guy who replaces Will Johnson. It is Avery Johnson's team in 2025. He puts on over 15 pounds of muscle. He finds himself in the 23-mile-an-hour club. He's fast. He's stronger. You think that helps with his longevity to help with that. Then you bring in some tall wide receivers to the mix, and it gets you excited. So having this transitional year, if that's what you want to call it, last year after the wheels falling off in Houston, which was a wild game for it to happen, is maybe the right way to look at it. It's not the way I have, but it might be the right way to do so. And getting out of that 8-9 win tier that Chris Kleiman and his staff has done for the last couple seasons since the 2022 year of winning the Big 12 is probably the most important thing for them to do in 2025. So I'm kind of right on board with you. Maybe that's why I can't get the right grasp of TCU, because the expectations are probably exactly where they are with Kansas State. It's Arlington or bust. For you didn't bring as many transfer portal pieces. You're kind of running it back. For Kansas State, it was all about retention. That is probably the biggest point, but they brought in some impact transfer pieces in my mind, especially in the wide receiver room, bringing in size, bringing in some depth with the offensive line as well. I think they brought all the right pieces to make sure Avery can succeed. If he doesn't succeed this year, then I think you have a bigger problem to hatch out for 2026 and beyond, because every single piece that is needed for Avery Johnson to succeed is on this roster this year. You mentioned Hoover, and I went out and did a show a few weeks ago talking about some of the top quarterbacks in the Big 12, and the Big 12 is loaded with quarterbacks. There's another conference that is more deep in the quarterback position than the Big 12, and I did a top 5 ranking, and I left Hoover off, and I heard it. I heard that I should have not done that. And when you look at his rankings and you look at his stats from last year, almost 4,000 yards last year, I was probably asinine for making that happen. What makes Josh Hoover so good of a quarterback, and why are you excited for having him again under center in 2025?
Well, I don't want to narrow it down to just intangibles, but I really do think when you start with Josh, he just brings a good leadership and energy to the team. When he took over, when Chandler Morris got hurt a few years back, even though the team still didn't really get their footing and start winning, I think you could just tell Christian, like, okay, they really like this guy. Like the way they respond to him. I remember a particular moment, he threw an interception in Lubbock against Texas Tech. It was a last-minute drive trying to tie the game, and he threw a bad pick. And afterwards on the bench, you saw like 2 of the offensive linemen with their arms around him, trying to encourage him. And to me, it just seemed like, okay, maybe this is his team. Like it just felt like it was trending that way. But Sonny Dykes told us at media days that he throws the best, like of all the QBs he's coached. And I mean, he's had Jared Goff, he's had Nick Foles, and among others through his career, he throws the best ball out of all of them. I feel like he processes things really well. He's really good at diagnosing defenses and making reads. He's not really mobile. So, I mean, he truly is kind of an old school pocket passer. He's getting the ball out of his hands quickly. But I think the most impressive thing from last season, I mean, 4,000 yards, like even in our pass happy world, that's still pretty good. And honestly, he did that without much of a threat of a running game at all. I mean, TCU could not run the ball the traditional way. They finally sort of figured something out with Savion Williams, one of their wide receivers, as a Wildcat quarterback, and they rode that through the last couple of weeks of the season. But everybody knew he was going to be throwing the ball probably 30 to 40 times a game, and he was still able to have success. And as the year went on, he cut down those turnovers, stopped throwing as many picks, and you saw the wins start to pick up too. For Avery Johnson, I guess, what is the next step for him? I know he's got that incredible athleticism, that ability to run. What did you see last year as far as, okay, this is where he could improve and really take his game to the next level and maybe elevate the team this upcoming season?
Yeah, leadership will be one of the first things I look for. And I think that is something we're already starting to see in the offseason, but just kind of showing a little bit more control on the field itself. And I think that comes with just being more of a veteran of the game and going into his junior season, the second year as full-time quarterback. I think you're going to see that. Him having Matt Wells as the offensive coordinator, the sole offensive coordinator, is going to be a big thing for him as well. You get this consistency, you get structure, and that's always important when you're talking really any facet of any type of job, any type of team, not just being a quarterback in a college football program. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what we see from him in that regard. Throwing inconsistencies was his biggest flaw, in my opinion, last year. Whether that was because of play calling or because of performance, it's yet to be determined. But I lean some of those, because he did have a decent amount of interceptions last year. I lean some of those towards play calling, because in the Rape Bowl against Rutgers, when Matt Wells was the play caller, I didn't see as much of those. And that could have been the fact that because Avery Johnson was playing in his 13th game of the season, or because we were starting to see some different play calling. So I want to see a little bit more from that. He's got a big test right off the bat in Dublin, week 0 against Iowa State. There's no rush to make sure, or there is a rush, to make sure that you are ready to go right away. And TCU has the same thing. They are going to be tested right off the bat. And we got to talk about that. I want to talk about your schedule. I want to talk about the fact of what happens if TCU doesn't get to Arlington, like you said, a big disappointment. What does that mean for Sonny Dykes, a team that was just in the national championship a few years ago? Let's talk about that more next, right here on this Locked On College crossover of Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Horned Frogs. But first, Stephen, let's talk about today's sponsor, and that's 5 Hour Energy. Time to fuel up and turn it up with 5 Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Let's be honest, some days on the course are off, and you just got to get that extra boost to stay sharp, energized. That's when 5 Hour Energy Transfusion can come into play. Golf is all about good times and good people and good flavors, of course. The grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without chasing down the bev cart. So if you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use promo code LOCKEDONGolf to receive 20% off your first order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions, but the code is not good on subscription orders, so keep that one in mind. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need. Power through. Order transfusion flavored 5 Hour Energy shots today. Welcome on back to this Locked On College crossover. Locked On Horned Frogs, Locked On Kansas State. Stephen Simcox here, and I'm Christian Rauh, and we are talking into this exciting Big 12 matchup that we're going to get in the middle of the season between these two teams that met in Arlington in 2022. That's something that I tend to look back quite some time for Kansas State, because that's the last time they won it all for the Big 12. And since then, they've had some mediocre seasons. And it's kind of been the same way for TCU. It's a lot similar than just being the same color, almost the same color purple. I shouldn't say the same color, almost the same color purple when it comes to these teams. But let's look at TCU. With Kansas State, they got Iowa State right off the bat. Week 0 in Dublin to start the college football season. But TCU is kind of in the same boat. They have a big test right off the bat. Their non-conference is very interesting, to say the least. And you get the first taste of a Hall of Fame coaching legend making his college football debut, and Bill Belichick heading to Chapel Hill at North Carolina. What's your thoughts about taking on the Tar Heels to start off the college football season?
Well, I mean, a good opportunity for TCU to kind of get back on the map. It's a standalone game. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of talk about Jordan Hudson and that relationship and everything that comes with it. But I tend to think, Christian, like as much as there's been kind of a circus around UNC, to me, like Bill Belichick has something to prove here. I mean, like he basically was asked to leave the NFL. He didn't voluntarily get out of the game. Nobody hired him. And then he took this job in the college ranks to show like, okay, let me show you guys I can still coach. So I have some concern. I have some bad flashbacks a couple of years ago I spent a lot of the offseason talking about how Deion Sanders was going to get destroyed by TCU in his college debut. I still hear from some of those nice people that cheer for him in my comments from time to time at how wrong I was, and I was very wrong. But if TCU is the team I think they are, I feel like it's a game where they should handle business. I mean, defensively, they should have a big advantage against the North Carolina team that's learning a new system and incorporating a lot of new personnel. I do wonder and have some concern about a great defensive mind like Bill Belichick having an entire offseason to really digest. Like TCU's not going to do a lot different on offense than what they did last season. So I assume he's going to have a really good game plan. Can they adjust? I believe they can. And, they turn right around a couple weeks later and play SMU, who was in the college football playoff last year. So it's a tough non-conference slate. They don't really dodge anybody in Big 12 play. I mean, with the 16 teams now, you look at that schedule and your first thought is, okay, who do we miss? Well, they're playing K-State on the road. They play BYU on the road. They get Colorado. They get Iowa State, Arizona State. I mean, all the big names that we think are going to be good, it feels like TCU matches up with them. The Dublin trip, I know, like, it'll be a great opportunity for those guys from a scheduling standpoint and just kind of getting off to the right foot. That's not an easy game. I don't have to tell you that, and K-State fans that, but it's not like you're going over there and playing an FCS school or a G5 school. You're playing a conference rival to start the year. So how important is that, Christian, just to win that game and get off to a good start before, taking on the rest of the season?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, there's people going out and report saying whoever loses that game, their season's over before, basically any other team in the Big 12 even gets a chance to play a game, which I don't know if I'm going to go that far with it. But, I mean, Iowa State was just in the Big 12 championship game last year. Right. Now, for the record, for the last, 20 years or so, excluding Texas and Oklahoma, no other team has gone back-to-back making it to the Big 12 championship, us included in 2022. But we'll see if they can continue their strides. Iowa State brought back a lot of really good teams, really good players, So there's a lot of things to be excited about for that. On that regard, we've been doing Farmageddon Fridays on Locked On Kansas State for the last couple of weeks now, and I've really got to go understand what Iowa State's bringing to the table. And I mean, it could easily be a coin flip to what's going to happen in Dublin. I truly do think that could be a coin flip of a football game. But that's such a tough game to start with. I mean, there's one thing starting against UNC in a non-conference game. Don't get me wrong, that's a tough game, but you're playing a division or a conference game, and it's one of your rivals too in Farmageddon right off the bat, and you get to lose a home game. That's a game that should have been in Manhattan this year. It's tough. I like it for the Big 12. I think it's good for the brand of the conference, which is always a plus side in this ever-growing battle of politics on and off the field when it comes to these different conferences. But it's definitely a tough thing. Not only am I worried about that game, I'm worried about some of those games, non-conferences afterwards, because we've seen some of these teams that have left Dublin, like Nebraska, Northwestern, struggle. Not lose, but at least struggle against some of these FCS opponents that second week around. Look, when I look at your schedule, North Carolina, SMU, to have your non-conference, you got a FCS opponent in between those. And you're right, though. You didn't lose. The only team that you really miss out on in the conference that could be tough is Texas Tech. A lot of people are expecting Tech to be tough with a lot of their NIL and transfer portal pickups. Let's say this goes astray. Let's say this goes south and they don't get to go to Arlington. They find themselves in the same boat as they were last year, maybe even worse. Does this put Sonny Dykes potentially in the hot seat in 2025?
That's a great question. I mean, I remember when they lost to Houston last year, and it's funny that because I forgot about K-State's loss to Houston. Both of these teams kind of had just tough moments against that opponent. But I was doing the post-game show, Christian, and I'm looking at like the live chat box as I'm recording, and person after person is like, fire Sonny Dykes, or they want me to say it. They're like, I need you to say that we need to fire Sonny Dykes. And in that moment, I did think it was a possibility. I feel like the way they closed last year, it bought them some time. I think it would truly take 4-8, missing a bowl game, basically 4-8, 5-7, without some sort of significant injury that makes sense to those results. And then, yes, I could see them moving on. If they do better than that, I feel like they'll give him one more year. But the wild card here is they've got a new AD. Jeremiah Donati left for South Carolina, and so they hired Mike Buddy, who comes over from Army. Of course, that's a very different, the way the athletic department runs is very different, but he did a good job there, and he seems like a very ambitious guy. So, I mean, bottom line is, like, he didn't hire Sonny Dykes. I think it would be easier for him if things got bad to say, you know what, let's move on, and I'll go find my person. There is a pretty significant buyout because they gave him a big extension after that national championship appearance season. But, everybody says the buyout's too big until it's not. Like, that's always the huge obstacle. It's like, well, we could never buy him out, but then things get bad enough and suddenly somebody comes up with a check. So my general thought is no. If things get really bad, I could see it happening with new leadership, but I feel like he's safe. Chris Kleiman, not on the hot seat, but I wanted to ask you kind of a big picture thing. You were talking about how they built their team earlier. Does this new revenue sharing model, do you think it benefits a university like in a program like K-State that, yeah, they're going to go in the portal and find some people, but I think they still want to mainly build through high school recruiting and developing like they have for a long time?
Yeah, I think that's a twofold question, especially with what's going on with that whole executive order that just came out this past week as well. If that executive order really helps bring structure to the revenue and not, take away the pay for play, I think that's good for like mid-major power conference teams, if you will. And what I mean by mid-major, like not Texas Tech paying $28 million because they have an oil tycoon as one of their sponsors, right? So I think it's a good thing if they can have the structure so they can focus on the high school recruiting. They don't have to worry about fighting in the portal. We're learning the hard way in the basketball side, and this is the only time I'm going to bring up basketball, but like Sonny Dykes kind of reminds me of the Jerome Tang situation. You over-exceeded in your first year. You made the national championship. Jerome Tang went the Elite Eight in Kansas State, and then they really haven't succeeded, at least to the expectations that you'd assume over the last couple of years since then. So, but on the basketball side, they've been spending a lot of money in the NIL. The last few years, they've been willing to pay some of the top transfers to come in, and it still hasn't gotten to the NCAA tournament. So on the football side, I think they would love to make sure that they could more focus on the recruiting, kind of go to, dare I say, a traditional route where if all this crazy stuff happening with NIL and structure and things like that. But who knows, man? This is ever growing every single day. We're learning from multiple teams, even in our own conference, that it's adapt or die. We're seeing coaches that have been around for years, like Mike Gundy, who was getting rid of and firing 16, 15-year coaches on his roster just so he can make sure he changes things. He adding more to his NIL. So if I'm Kansas State, I'm doing whatever it takes to make sure you adapt and stay with the times. I think our athletic director, Gene Taylor, is doing a really good job with that. And Chris Kleiman does a very good job of taking care of what he has and focuses on fit instead of getting those 4-star, 5-stars, because they don't come around too often in the state of Kansas. We need to look at the Big 12 as a whole before we wrap up this, because you think there's high expectations of TCU, and I agree with you. And now that I finally got a better grasp of this program, I want to hear what you think about the rest of the conference, because it's always a crapshoot when it comes to the Big 12. We had Arizona State finishing last, and they won the whole dang thing last year. So I want to get your big thoughts, and we'll talk about the Locked On preseason poll as we finish up this show of this Locked On College crossover of Locked On Horned Frogs and Locked On Kansas State. The Big 12 is wild. I don't know if I can have any other way to say it, Stephen, but there's the deepest conference in college football. I think you can say that. We're not talking about teams like Purdue, who we can think win the Big 10. But if somebody made an argument for me today that 0-9 Oklahoma State last year could find themselves towards the top or competing for a tiebreaker scenario, I'd listen to it. I would listen to the argument because we've seen it happen before in the Big 12. It's a gauntlet of a conference. TCU, 8-4 season last year, same with Kansas State. You think Arlington is a must for the Horned Frogs this year. What makes you think that they can get to be one of those top teams in the conference in 2025 before we start talking about the rest of the programs?
Well, I mean, coulda, shoulda, woulda, but I really feel like they were a couple plays away from being 10-2. Like the UCF game, they blew a 21-point lead in the second half, which was unacceptable. Against Houston, they just didn't really show up. That Baylor game was back and forth. So while their schedule is tougher, I believe the improvements this team has made, they added Jordan Dwyer on the outside in the transfer portal, a receiver they really like. They've gotten deeper on the defensive line. They feel like this offensive line is in a better place. They should be able to handle their business and win these games. So, yeah, I just think, between the continuity on the coaching staff and the core group of these players, the improvement of Josh Hoover, the improvement of that run game, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. And the great thing is, we were talking about that schedule being tough earlier. We'll have a pretty good idea of who this team is after 3 or 4 weeks. They open conference play with Arizona State. They play SMU early in the season. They have a game against UNC that I think has some pressure. So we'll get a good feel for who this team is in the first month of the year. I guess I'll pass it off to you. Do you think K-State can get to the championship game? And who else are you looking at as kind of the teams you circle as this Big 12 season starts?
Yeah. I put out that I think Arizona State could return, but there's always that thought process that, there's not a team that returns to the Big 12 championship, and who knows, maybe Arizona State will be that team that defies the odds. Obviously Iowa State, I think we take care of them early in week 0. So I'm putting them out there. I think they can get to Arlington. Kansas State can. I personally have my predictions of Arizona State and Kansas State 1-2. I know that's pretty chalk to what we have for our Locked On Podcast Network preseason poll. Put that up on here right now. TCU is predicted to finish 7th in this. This is from all the hosts, and Kansas State 2. That's why maybe this is again why I think TCU I just can't get a grasp on, because everybody puts them in the middle. This was, for the record, pretty sure came out before the Jake Retzlaff news of BYU. Sitting at 6. I think BYU would be a little lower in that conversation. So having TCU towards the top 5 means you're competing. I mean, 2 years ago, there was a 7-way tie the final week of the season for who was going to make it to Arlington. So I can see TCU totally being contention. Same with Kansas State. I think you got to have you have to go at least 7-2 in the conference. I think that is like the bare minimum, and that might not be enough. That might put you in a tiebreaker scenario. So 8-1 is probably where you have to be to make sure you win or get to Arlington. But my prediction right now is a 10-2 finish for Kansas State with a 7-2 record in the conference. Hopefully that's enough to make it to Arlington. What do you think? Do you think it's got to be 7-2 or 8-1, or where do you think the Big 12 is for Arlington this year?
I think 7-2 is probably where you start. Even though Arizona State and Iowa State, they had a few losses and were able to get there, I just think the league as a whole, you can't really lose more than 2. The one thing I'll say to end this, and please feel free to come at me, Tech fans. I've lived in the state of Texas my whole life. I know they spent all this money. I know they've done all these great things and they've won the offseason. If there's one thing that's been true my entire life, and listen, things change all the time. The Texas Tech Red Raiders are probably going to win 8 or 9 games, and they're not going to be in a conference title game. Like, God bless them. I like what they're doing. I like the aggressiveness. I have no problem with it. Like, if you got that money, spend it. And I think they've added the right way. I mean, I think they did some good things on the offensive and defensive line. I just don't really trust Baron Morton. I don't trust Joey McGuire and that coaching staff, to be honest. You got a new OC, a new DC, and a brand new roster. I mean, is it crazy to think that they couldn't drop a few games and end up on the outside looking in? I understand why they're a popular pick. I just don't see it. And that's kind of where I'm at as far as Tech being a power broker. But I believe in Arizona State. I believe in Kansas State. As much as I almost kind of vomit when I want to say this, I believe in Baylor to a certain extent. I think they've done some nice things. So I do believe there's a lot of teams that could find themselves in Arlington, and hopefully Christian will be doing a crossover episode in the first couple weeks of December talking about these two teams playing for a Big 12 championship.
Hey, I wouldn't mind a rematch of 2022 as long as the result is exactly the same. Okay?
Yeah, I'll disagree with you on that, but I agree with the first part.
Thanks everyone for listening to this Locked On College crossover. Be sure to like, rate, subscribe wherever you're listening, and we'll see you back here next time. Take care.